Okay, now we're standing here with Peter Stilwell. At least one English interview this time, because I think you have especially relevant things to say about like musculoskeletal therapy. Peter, can you introduce yourself first?
Yeah, my name's Peter Stilwell. I'm a postdoc researcher at the University of Southern Denmark. So SDU is the acronym. I'm Canadian. I just moved about a month ago. And previously I was at McGill as a postdoc. So McGill's in Canada. And still affiliated with McGill and working with folks there and also doing some research in Denmark. So yeah, and I have a clinical background as a chiroppractor, kinesiology, and then also research degree in physiotherapy, and PhD in health, interdisciplinary work. So that's a whirlwind of my eclectic background here.
So what did you make you move out of clinic work? So why did you choose to go into like science?
Yeah, I don't even think it was like an intentional choice. Like I was always wanted to do I was interested in research. I was interested in teaching. I was interested in clinical practice, and I was like, I'll just do it all. Like that's reasonable. And then quickly realized that's not really that feasible. So during my PhD, I was like, I'll take a year off from clinical practice, pursue some more research opportunities that I didn't have the ability to do because I was practicing pretty much full time while trying to do my research. And then that 1 year turned into many years now. And so I haven't returned, but still connected clinically in many different ways through the research I do, qualitative research, but also for many years ran like a community-based program that was very in touch with people with lived experience, and so connected that way.
So, and we ask everyone like how they define pain-related suffering for themselves, and you actually have like a paper trying to do that. So can you give us your definition of pain-related suffering?
Yeah, I think it's such a tricky topic, right? And our paper that I was talking about was essentially just some early steps on like hammering down what are kind of the key factors or key attributes, or you could think of them as like key characteristics of suffering. So I guess first off, we said like pain and suffering are distinct experiences, but they also can be interrelated. So pain can lead to suffering or pain-related suffering, but there also can be these other types of suffering. So that in the absence of pain, so grief-related suffering is an example I gave. Potentially even like depression-related suffering, that type of stuff. And I guess what are other things that we highlight? So it's quite well established that similar to pain, suffering or pain-related suffering is a subjective experience or a personal experience. There was some talks where people were talking about other alternatives to that, more objectivist approaches to suffering, but in our paper we disagree with that for conceptual and ethical type of reasons. We also talk about how the experience of suffering has this negative affective valence, which I think is quite uncontroversial. So similar to like the experience of pain, there's this emotional or affective component. And the most interesting one is another, I guess the fourth attribute that we talked about, like pain-related suffering or other types of suffering involves disruption to one's sense of self. And we had fun discussions on what the self means, the different potential facets of the self, and how people can suffer in different ways depending on the type of self that is impacted, or the facet of self or the aspect of self that is impacted. That's probably enough ranting for me.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely a good introduction. When we make a little bit deeper dive in your talk, you were criticizing also the theory of Cassell a little bit. That was mentioned a lot in these last 3 days here, and you had some specific critiques. Can you make them bring them on point again?
Yeah, and I guess emphasizing like this, I'm just one small piece of this work. It's teamwork. The publication that you're referring to, Journal of Pain, we published that in 2022. Team effort for sure. And I guess as a starting point, Eric Cassell did some really landmark work. Like I think he really advanced the field, getting suffering on people's radar. But we did argue that maybe his views on suffering are overly narrow. So he talked about how you need this kind of like sense of your past and your future in order to suffer. You need to be essentially like worried about destruction of yourself or your integrity as a self or your integrity as a person. And we've argued that like that's overly narrow. Cassell actually quite explicitly denied suffering in infants or certain non-human animals, or potentially even people with cognitive impairments where they can't have a sense of their past or future or worrying about the future. So we offered some critiques of maybe that being a bit too narrow. And we offered a view of the self that's multifaceted, work based largely on Sean Gallagher's work, quite famous philosopher. So we argue that yes, we can have certain types of suffering. That's what in the area of Cassell, but also other types of suffering that would be the type of suffering that potentially infants would have, or non-human animals, or people like with dementia. So that was the crux of it. Yeah.
We had in the last days a lot of different perspectives on this topic on suffering, and also a lot of different research approaches, neuroscientific approaches, also philosophical perspectives on it. You mentioned that you explicitly are a fan of qualitative research. Yeah, how did your work now in suffering was like influenced by the qualitative messages from patients that talk about their suffering? Can you talk a little bit on that?
Yeah, for sure. I guess I was drawn, like if we're talking about pain as a subjective experience, like what's the best way to better understand that or kind of get a bit of an access to it. And it's like people's narratives, their voices, their stories, their personal experiences are the best thing we have. That's not to downplay the importance of basic science, biological research, neuroimaging. That stuff's extremely important too. But I got over the years just quite interested in that qualitative component, the richness of the data. So our team has been doing research on that in the realm of suffering to better understand the different ways the self can be disrupted, and how patients experience that. So that's shaped a lot of our work. And we also, a part of our team, have people with lived experience that are embedded in the team as equal team members. So it's essential if we're talking about these personal lived experiences to have that perspective and have them as members of the team. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe you can give us an example for that. So what do patients say when they report this kind of disruption to the self?
Yeah, I guess that would maybe require like a little bit of unpacking of like the different aspects of the self. So we talked about the narrative self. So that involves like essentially the stories that we and others tell about ourselves, our self-identity that's developed over time. Certain aspects of that can be disrupted. So important life roles, relationships, goals, aspirations. That's very much in line with what Eric Cassell was talking about. But there's also this other aspect of the self, this minimal self or experiential self. That's our like immediate in the moment experiences. We talked about how that involves like a sense of agency over our experiences, a sense of ownership over our body. And that can be disrupted. People can be so overwhelmed by their experience, feel like they don't have control over their actions, over their sensations. They can feel like their body's alien or foreign, or even have out-of-body experiences, disruption of ownership in that sense. So these are the types of things that we hear. Yeah.
Out of these two different selves, if you want to call it like that, you propose some ideas how we can structure our therapy options, especially for like musculoskeletal, like non-pharmacological therapies. And I found this idea really nice to like have a little bit of a structure when which therapy is better and when not. Can you like describe it a little bit?
Yeah, I guess this is like super speculative type of stuff, and we talk about this in some correspondence that we had related to that paper that I mentioned in 2022. So there was some commentary or a letter on our paper talking about the importance of mindfulness, potentially as like this like really important treatment to beat the power of the now, letting go of the past, essentially not worrying about the future, that being a key to alleviating suffering. And we challenge that a bit. We're like, yeah, maybe that could be helpful in people with the narrative disruption that we talked about. So not worrying about the future, being more in the present. But that minimal self-disruption experiences where you're just totally overwhelmed by your in-the-moment experience, maybe those types of treatments might not be that helpful or potentially even harmful, potentially. So I think in that short correspondence, we give the example of torture. Like, is being in the moment, in the present, really the most important thing? Is that going to alleviate suffering? Or other things to consider is like, why do people have these out-of-body experiences during torture, during these like really overwhelming experiences of pain? That might be an adaptive defense mechanism. That might be actually a way to escape the present moment. So potentially considering the different types of suffering may lead us to more targeted care. And that's the emphasis in that little short correspondence that we had. Yeah.
Sorry. I don't have any more questions.
Now you focus now on mindfulness-based therapies, but you like describe like when example like manual therapy could have more value when we talk about like pain-related suffering. But I thought about like acceptance, commitment therapy wouldn't make sense if you have like a problem of your like minimal self, but could be important if you have like a disruption of your narrative self and when you could like work on values, etc. If other examples where we can structure our current therapies in pain management?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And yeah, this is just like speculative stuff, but like, and I guess the literature has done this or talked about this to a certain extent, like if there's disruption to bodily ownership, maybe body-based therapies to kind of get a person more attuned to their body or more in your body kind of might be helpful. So manual therapies, graded motor imagery, sensory discrimination training, these are the types of things that come to mind that may get people more comfortable and attuned to their body. But that's like speculative type of stuff. I'm piecing together theory and past literature. And so certainly there needs to be more studies on like targeting these different aspects of or different modes of suffering and potentially see what happens. Yeah.
Okay, let's speculate a little bit more. How can we assess suffering? I think you wrote something about metaphors as well. Could that be a potential way to access people's suffering? Like listening to their stories, how they describe their pain, how they experience, how they like draw it eventually. Could that be a way to like access how they live with their pain?
I love that question. Yeah, I've written on like, pain-related metaphors, some different pieces. And I think, we hear it all the time. You see it in the literature, you hear it in the qualitative interviews. People use metaphors and essentially it's like comparing one thing to another, taking something really abstract. So the experience of pain or the experience of suffering being very abstract and mapping it onto something a bit more concrete. So a simple example would be people say that their pain is stabbing or burning. They're not literally being stabbed or burned. It's a metaphor to get at what the experience is like. So it makes sense that people would use these similar types of, or potentially different types of metaphors to express their suffering as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you come home very well, and I hope we see you again.
Yeah. Really appreciate it, and yeah, thanks for doing this one for the one English one English person. Appreciate it. And you folks are doing great work, so thank you.
We'll ask Loic to translate it.